Throughout history, God has been on the move. He moved the cosmos into existence. He moved the heart of Moses to set his people free. He moved the exiles from Babylon to Jerusalem, showing his power throughout it all. God is a God who is on the move. And he expects the same of us, the church, to move with audacity, to move with humility, to move with generosity. God is on the move. Thus, we need a move.
So when I was 16 years old, my dad and I actually built a vehicle together. It was a 1976 Ford F-150 Highboy. If you are unfamiliar with those terms, have no fear. It basically just was an old truck that was really big, really loud, and got about 6 miles per gallon. And if you can kind of picture that type of vehicle, that's what we made. It was huge, had 36-inch tires. It was this beast of a truck. And my dad and I had dedicated a couple of years leading up to when I eventually got my driver's permit and then my license, and we had dedicated to building this vehicle. It was immaculate. It was beautiful. It was everything that we had kind of hoped for. And when I mean beautiful, I mean like beautiful in like, you know how like something's like ugly but also beautiful? You know what I mean? Like you got that cute little, you know, like that kid and they're like your niece. And you're like, they're cute. No? No one at all feels that way? Fine, whatever. All right, you've all seen the photos of people you're related to and you're like, they're cute, right? You know, they're beautiful. They're beautiful in their own ways. So the truck that I owned was beautiful in its own way. And what I mean by that is that the actual structural integrity of the vehicle and the engine and the drivetrain and everything, that was great. We did an awesome job with that. But it was the exterior that needed a little love. We went to the junkyard and we actually piecemealed the entire exterior of the truck together. So we found a door from a 79 Ford, and then we got a hood from a 76 Ford, and we had the rear end of a 72, and we just knew they fit the drivetrain, they fit the chassis, and so it worked. And so when you looked at the truck, it kind of looked like it was 7 cars put together. Hence, our entire family, not just my siblings and my parents, but our entire family, extended family, had a nickname for my truck, and it was called Junko. And the reason for that is because it looked like a piece of junk. That's literally what it was, but it was my car. It was this vehicle that my dad and I, we built together. That, if you're a guy in the room, when you're growing up as a little boy, there are certain things that kind of stick out in the history of your brain and your imagination and your memories and all these things. And whether you had a great dad or not, maybe you had a mentor or whatever, but there are things that you just remind yourself of, and you're like, man, like that was a momentous occasion in my life, right? Guys, you remember that at all? You have any of those with your dads or whatnot? For me, this buying or building this truck was that moment that meant something to me. Like the truck, even though it was ugly, it was like, yeah, but my dad and I joked around in that truck, and my dad actually, when I was 16, he let me use some curse words. He was like, hey son, so when you're in the garage and you're working on a truck, here are the ones you can use, okay? 16 years old, being able to say a couple of naughty words but not get in trouble. I was like, we're bonding. This is awesome, this is great. Like the truck was just, it meant so much, and it was something that I just cherished so much. But all of that changed 9 months after it became licensed and basically road ready. So in Denver, Colorado, and basically all of Colorado in general, in the DMV world, if you build your own vehicle, you have to go through certain processes of getting it licensed. One, you have to do emissions, make sure that it's not just like emitting horrible things into the atmosphere. You have to like prove that you did it right. You got to give them the VIN number of the thing. There's a lot of processes that go into it because they just don't want hunk of junks on the road, right? And so we did that, got it approved. We did not paint it yet. That was our next step, but this thing ready to roll. And for 9 months, man, I loved that vehicle. Drove it everywhere. I embarrassed my little sister in every way I possibly could. Because we drove together because we were in high school together. She's 2 years younger than me. And I would just drive up to all of her friends and I'd be like, what's up, ladies? And she's like, and then she'd be like, Josh, and like she's this freshman in high school. And she's like, my big brother's a jerk, and it was great. And I love that truck. And 9 months after we got it licensed, one night, We were driving home from school. We were at a football game. It was on a Friday night. And we were driving out. And while we were driving home, because we lived about 10 minutes away from our house, we went to school 10 minutes away from our home. While we were driving, like the room started to smell like gas. And I was sitting there and I was just like, well, we just rebuilt it. And chances are, I bet what's going on, because my sister's like, Josh, you smell that? And I was like, I bet it's just the carburetor. I bet it's just there's too much gas going into the engine and it's not combusting. So we're just getting excess gas. No big deal, sis. Like, let's just get to the house. So I'll actually kind of go a little bit. I'll just kind of floor it a little bit. We'll get there faster. We'll get home and I'll fix it. And if you know old cars, you get the screwdriver and you turn the carburetor and it kind of, tightens it up. And I thought, no big deal. So we're driving. 5 minutes later, we're not only smelling the fumes of the gas, but now, as I'm driving, smoke is billowing out of the hood of the vehicle. And I'm sitting there like, like, well, I don't know. I don't know what color smoke it is. It could be the radiator. Because we had built this truck, so we knew it could be something. It could be steam for all I know. So I was like, okay, a really strange, definitely got to get to the house. Like we've got to get going. And then about 30 seconds after the billowing of smoke, flames started coming out of the hood of the truck. And in that moment, I was torn because I was like, I should probably stop the vehicle, but I also need to get to my house. But also, if someone saw this happening and I floored it, that would look awesome because flames would be coming out of the truck. And I was, just like, and I was just like, I don't know, I'm torn. And I was like, but I love my sister and I don't want her to die. That's not a good thing, right? But I was just like, okay, I don't know what to do because we're not close to the house and it's gonna take 10 minutes for firemen to show up and I don't know what to do. And so I made the worst mistake you could possibly make. In that moment, I floored it and it was a gas problem. And the moment that carburetor opened up, the hood of my truck, poof, blew up. The engine exploded, and in that moment, I realized it's time to get out, right? Because I was just, this isn't good. You can imagine this. So I grabbed my little sister, and I was like, we gotta go. So I pulled off, grabbed her, and then because you have truck beds back in the day, right? So there's a long bed. So I just kind of pulled her, ran out. And the way that I was thinking the whole time is I had seen enough Fast and Furious movies to think I was like, guys, when cars get on fire, they blow up and launch 10 feet into the air, right? And I'm 16, how would I know that that's fake? That's not what cars do, right? But I was like, we gotta go. So we started running, went to the other side. I called my dad first, and he's like, call 911. What are you doing? Called 911, and 8 minutes went by. 8 minutes. And this truck that I loved, this truck that you guys all know this because I've already said it. It wasn't just a truck. What was burning right before my very eyes, to me, were promises. Where a relationship was burning to the ground. I'm never gonna have a chance to do what I did with my dad. And so my sister and I just sat there for 8 minutes waiting, and we were just crying as we saw this thing burn to the ground. And the only thing left by the time the firemen came and my dad showed up was just the chassis and the tires. That was it. For a couple of days afterwards, we just wept, and there was a day, it was actually Friday and Saturday, Sunday, and eventually Monday came around, and I walked up to my dad, and I said, Dad, I literally can't go to school. You can make me, but in the end, you're gonna have to drop me off, because I don't have a car, and I'm literally just gonna skip out. I'm too hurt. And so my dad, it was actually really gracious of him. He's like, dude, you take as much time as you need to be in pain. And so for a couple of weeks, I went to school on Tuesday, but for a couple of weeks after that, my dad and I would have these conversations. We'd say, what are we gonna do with, you need a vehicle, you drive your sister back and forth to school, you're also kind of her liaison for Skate City, and she's got these guys she wants to meet, and all of these things, and down in the Springs, and what am I gonna do, right? And I had a job. I actually worked at a Gunther Tootie's, as a bar, or not, as a bus boy. My name was Scooter, by the way, and It's not a joke, it's for real. And but he's like, what are we gonna do? And so we had talked about like buying just a cheap Honda Civic, or he's just like, what do we do? Josh, do we just buy something? And we ended up coming to this resolution for us where we thought, like in the midst of the sorrow and the burning and what we felt like promises that were destroyed and hope that was destroyed, a couple weeks later we said, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna rebuild. And the way that we're gonna do it, and my dad is a little bit like me, and like he gets excited and amped and stuff, and he's like, Josh, we're not gonna rebuild on the old chassis, bro. We're gonna go get a new one, and we're gonna go find a car. We're gonna find a truck that looks just like Junko, but better. Painted, bro. Painted. And then we're gonna work on that engine and rebuild it, and we're gonna put all this energy and effort, and we are going to rebuild, because to not rebuild, to live in fear, to not trust the unknown, that wouldn't bring out what we wanted in us, right? It would be worth rebuilding. Guys, as we're jumping into the book of Nehemiah, we've been in this Old Testament study for a little while, traveling through Ezra and Haggai and Esther. We're getting to Nehemiah. We're getting to a book titled Nehemiah, named after this guy, named Nehemiah, where the main character is encountering a type of situation like my dad and I had, just on a massive scale. Something he loves has been destroyed. Something he cares about has been ruined. Something that he desperately felt like embodied promises and faithfulness has been burned to the ground. And in the midst of his despair, he makes a decision to rely on God to rebuild. He literally makes a decision to rebuild, basing his faith on a move of God. And it's literally what the entire book of Nehemiah is all about. This man saying, God, I will trust you in the rebuild process, even though I could easily give up. And God does some incredible things. I want you to look at chapter 1, starting in verse 1. We get some great context here and set up for how the story unfolds. And if you're curious at all about the historical kind of timeline of all this, Nehemiah and Ezra are contemporaries. Those two characters, because we just finished studying the book of Ezra, they actually overlap in about a 25-year period. So there's a lot of similarities, and even the exact same situations are talked about over and over again. So for example, last week, we talked about how the Israelites were living in sin by intermarrying with people from other nations and all of those things. That actually becomes an issue later on in Nehemiah chapter 8. That's actually the exact same story, just told from a different perspective. If you've ever seen that really terrible, cheesy movie called Vantage Point, the Bible has vantage points, but they're like awesome because they're God vantage points, which is great. But Nehemiah is all about the people rebuilding. So let's begin reading here and start verse 1, because there's some beautiful things going on here. Verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. So he's basically just saying, this is who I am. I got a daddy, and he's a Jewish man, and now here is my story. Here's where I'm at in my life. In the month of Kislev, in the 12th year, every single time you notice a date referenced in the book of Nehemiah, it is so important. Underline it, mark it down, take note of it. Very important things. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. So you can already tell that we've already got similar context going on, right? Nehemiah is not in Jerusalem, but he's in Susa, which is in the region of Babylon. But he knows that there are Jews that are in Jerusalem that have already rebuilt, that have already restored pieces of their life. He's fully aware of what's happening in Ezra and Haggai and in Esther. He's aware of those things. So he inquires about what's going on with the people of Israel. How are they doing? Verse 3. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and distress. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. Stop there. So here's how Nehemiah is setting up the scene for us. Nehemiah is a Jewish man living in this region called Susa. Susa is actually where Queen Esther was born before she actually became the queen. She was in this region of Susa. It was about a 2-day journey away from the actual epicenter of Babylon itself, the city center of Babylon. And Nehemiah was a high-ranking official in the Persian government. We'll learn about his vocation just a little bit from now. But he was kind of a big-time guy in the Persian government, but he was a Jewish man who loved God deeply. And in this month of Kislev, in the 20th year of this Artaxerxes king, you guys remember Artaxerxes? He's the exact same king who also allowed Ezra to go and bring the law back to the people of Israel. There's the overlap there. During this month, in this year, his brother and some of his friends come from Jerusalem after the rebuild, after bringing the law, after things have gone well, and he basically just says, how are things going? How is God being faithful to the people of Israel? He's like, I know that they've got their houses built and the temples built and the sacrifices are done, the priests are done, the word of God is done. I know that things are going well, but give me an update, man, life updates. How are things going? And what they tell him is not good. They say, Nehemiah, after all that has been done and all the ways that God has shown that he is faithful to his people, something horrible happens. The walls and gates of the city of Jerusalem have been burned to the ground. The ways that the Israelites protect themselves, literally, this is actually a promise that God had always made to his people, that he would be their wall and that he would be their protector and all of these things. But they're basically saying that the Israelites are at a breaking point of almost being destroyed, because it doesn't matter if they have the temple, it doesn't matter if they have their homes, it doesn't matter if they have an army and a military. If there's no wall to protect the city itself, then any nation can show up and destroy them. Any nation could ruin the promises God made to Israel, and there would be no Israel, which would therefore be, there would be no Messiah named Jesus Christ, which means that there would be no salvation for the whole world. I mean, the wall meant everything. It was a huge deal, and they say it's been burned to the ground. Now, there's some interesting history behind this. You're kind of asking the question well, we know the wall was destroyed over 120 years before this when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the city, right? So you're like, why is Nehemiah being told about something that happened 130 years before, right? Seems so strange. Chances are what happened, and we just don't have any record of this in the Old Testament at all, is that when the people of Israel came back 100 years before this, they built up the wall to a suitable kind of just like, they made it work. They put some pipe and drape up. The old saying, they put lipstick on a pig, you know what I mean? That's literally probably what they did. They just said, well, we need something. And now it's been utterly destroyed, and Nehemiah hears about it. His people are no longer protected. And his response is one that's really, it's really convicting. It's very beautiful. Look at verse 4. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God. I love it. I love how great Nehemiah thinks God is. It's not like, what's up, Pops? I got something to say. There's nothing wrong with casuality when your interaction with the Lord, but sometimes you need to be reminded just how great he actually is. And in a moment of despair, going to God casually may not be what your heart needs. In moments of despair, the only thing that you maybe need to say is, God, you are great. God, you are marvelous. God, you created the universe. God, you sustain me. You give me life. You give me hope. Because if you said anything else, then it would just remind you of your despair and your brokenness and your hurt and your pain, right? And so as our Nehemiah starts by just saying, you are awesome. Man, it's hard to say that God's awesome when we feel like everything's falling apart. The great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear, O God, be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. So this is what he's saying. You are so awesome, God. And here's what I ask. Can you please hear me as I pray, not just for me, but for the people I love? Can your ears be open, please? God's ears are always open, but Nehemiah just wants to ask for it. I do this with my boys all the time. We sit down, and just before they're gonna, usually it's when we have a babysitter. And we get a babysitter for that night, and they come into the room, and I sit down with them, and I go, okay, boys, like, what do we do to our babysitters? And they're like, we're nice to our babysitters. We don't punch our babysitters. We don't, and they do this thing, right? But what I always do is they always kind of like look away from me as they're saying it. And I'm like, no. Look at me, eyes. Right? This is what Nehemiah is asking of God. Listen, God, please hear. God, it's kind of a goofy analogy, but the reality is it's like he knows that God is listening, but he's still asking for it. God, would you please have your ears open, your eyes open? I need you. And then he continues. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly towards you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws that you gave your servant Moses. So he's referring to some sin of the people of Israel. It's very possible that he's actually referring to the sin that Ezra talked about last week, of their intermarrying, of it, and of their lack of desire to be holy people. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if God allowed the wall of his own city to be destroyed if his people keep crossing the wall to go marry people anyways. In many ways, God may go, fine, if you want to go live in sin, I'll just make it easier for you, go. We always assume God's going to stop us from making the worst mistakes, but sometimes God wants you to be in the pigsty before you look to him and go, man, I don't like this anymore, God. And he's like, yeah, you want to come back home? For all we know, the Israelites have sinned deeply, and Nehemiah is going, hey, we have sinned, please forgive us. Verse 8, remember the instruction that you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are from the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to a place that I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. This is a promise of God. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to this prayer, the prayer of this, your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Listen to us. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And then he has this interesting statement, the very end of verse 10. I was a cupbearer to the king. If you want to underline that, I would encourage you to do that. So in response, Nehemiah, he hears that the city walls are destroyed, gets wind of it. And then his response, because he knows the weight of this destruction, is that he just weeps. The very first thing Nehemiah says is, I wept, I fasted, and then I prayed. He just mourns. Because he knows how big of a deal this is, right? Like Nehemiah knows that this is not just some wall. Just like my dad and I knew that was just not just some truck. The wall represented God's favor. The wall represented his covenant with his people. I will keep you safe. I will secure you. I will dwell with you. He knew the implications of this destruction. And so he weeps, he mourns, he laments. But what is so beautiful, guys, is the way that Nehemiah laments, it's all focused on God. Did you notice that in his prayer? Like not once did Nehemiah sit down and go, God, pretty upset with you right now. Those are okay things to pray, but he doesn't do that. He's great and glorious, amazing God. You are the creator. You are the sustainer. You are a God who has a covenant of love, which is basically like he's double dipping his statement because we already know that covenant equates to love. God's covenant with you is that he will always be faithful to you, that he loves you, he delights in you, that he has an unfailing love for you, that even when you rebel against him, he still delights in you. And he says, you have a covenant of love with us. So he's basically just saying, you love us. And God, hear me please. I love it how he doesn't say, like, fix it now. Because a lot of us do that. What the heck? Come on. You said, what's going on? We do these things. I love it how he doesn't haggle with God. You know, there's no used car salesman interaction with Jesus, right? Nehemiah doesn't go like, if you, then I. We do that. Oh, we do that. Jesus. And we do it with sincerity. Like we actually think haggling with God is like totally okay, right? I don't know where we come up with it. We just think like that Jesus is just like this puppy and he's just like, I'm so excited to be with you. And you're like, okay, fine. All right, here we go. This is how it works. You know, like we had some friends that dog sat for this dog. Very beautiful dog, by the way. But that dog just loves to be loved. And I think some of us think Jesus is a lot like the golden retriever, like all the time, right? And so what we do is like we haggle and we're like, if you do this, little treat, and you sit down, then I'll be a good, you know, like, and the way we do it is it's with serious things. God, if you restore my marriage, then fine, I'll give up drinking. If you fix this situation with my boss, then fine, I'll start sharing the gospel. If you actually increase the amount in my bank account, then I'll actually be determined to be generous with my life. We do this barter thing, and especially when life starts falling apart, we love to do this because we think it's the only power that we've got in us. We're like, okay, well, if that's how you're gonna play it, then I'm gonna play hard to get. And God's like, I made you, right? My children try to do this all the time. Like every meal. All right, boys, it's dinner time. We're having PB&J and mac and cheese. And Zeke's like, I didn't ask for that. And I'm like, I just look at him. And now he's 4, so he understands my sarcasm a little bit. And I look at him and I was like, who made you, boy? And he's like, well, you did, Daddy. And I was like, and who owns this home? And you do, Daddy. And I was like, yeah, PB&J, right? Like, I don't know where, but we think we can do this with God. And what's so beautiful about Nehemiah is the only thing that he does is that he confesses. Oh God, you are so good and you are so amazing. And I confess not only for my sins, but the sins of my people. Because you are so good, there is no reason that this would happen unless we have done something. You don't destroy us just to destroy us. You are a good God. He pleads, oh God, please be faithful. I wish, guys, I so desperately wish I had a heart like Nehemiah. Like literally, I say this all the time. I'm a normal dude. Like some of you call me pastor, you call me Pastor Josh, and I appreciate that. But like every week I have the same struggles that you have. I have the same anger tendencies that you have. I have the same brokenness that you have. I have the same destructive patterns in my life that you have. And like last night, it was at 1 a.m. I was just like meditating over this text, and Brianna had already gone to sleep. And the reason why I was working on it at 1 a.m. was because Brianna and I had been fighting until 10 p.m. And the whole time I was sitting there, and in this moment of like realizing how sinful and broken I was in our marriage, I was sitting there going like, God, how come I don't have a heart like Nehemiah, where all I do is worship, all I do is plead, all I do is confess? But even now, I'm trying to barter with you on fixing my wife or fixing my kids. It's like, guys, all he does is weeps and praises God and says, please hear me. And then at the very end, in verse 10, Colin, if you want to put that back up, very end of verse 10, he says this really strange thing. I was a cupbearer to the king. What? Like, think about this. Hears the news, weeps, mourns, laments, praises God. God, would you please hear me? Oh, God, listen to your servant. Do something. By the way, I'm a barista at Starbucks. Didn't know if you knew that or not. Look at it. Look, if you actually have a physical Bible, my Bible does this. I think it's the funniest thing in the world. Prayer, one line. I was a cupbearer to the king. Where out of left field did that come from, Nehemiah? Who cares, dude? Like, I've been a server at Texas Roadhouse. I'm not flaunting about it, right? You know, I'm like, hey, I can get you unlimited rolls, you know? Like, I'm not gonna do that. I don't understand. Like, why would he do that, right? You should ask these questions, right? Because this is strange. Why? Why tell us your vocation? And it doesn't even seem relevant. So why? The reason why he's doing that is because Nehemiah is a really good storyteller. We'll learn that throughout this whole book. And really good storytellers keep you at the edge of your seat. Really good storytellers leave you at the very end of a chapter wanting to keep reading. So good writers do that. And what Nehemiah is doing is he's doing it in his own 5th century or 500 BC way of doing it. It's not a reference we would understand. We're not like, oh, he was a cupbearer. Like, we're not doing that, right? You're not. You're like, what am I? But he's keeping us at the edge of our seat because what we should be thinking as you're reading this is that a man who's from Susa hears about the people in Jerusalem and their plight. And yes, his heart is breaking and weeping and mourning. But you should be asking the question, can he even do anything about this? Like, is he just some guy? Like, is he just the politician that just says, like, our prayers are with you? And you're like, get out, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Are you just, like, can you actually move in any way to fix the problem, Nehemiah? Why is there a book written about you? Can you do something? Or are you just going to sit on your hands? What's up, man? This is the response the Israelites would have had. He's never even been to Jerusalem. They may think that he's with the Persians. He may be a bad guy. It's interesting. Cupbearers, their whole purpose, their vocation was not to be bartenders. It was not to be, Starbucks baristas, anything like that. A cupbearer in the 500 BC era of the Persian Empire, their purpose was to ensure that kings would not drink something that would kill them. So a cupbearer held the cup, they would sip on the cup, they would make sure that, and it was always wine, because back then they didn't have water purification systems, and most people just drank wine for hydration. And so the cupbearer would take the cup, drink it, and wait. And then if they died, the king was like, I'll take the water, right? But that's how they did it. And so the whole resolution of it is that they were there to preserve the health of the king. And now if you're thinking about that, that means that this cupbearer is not just some random person. This is not some servant or slave. This is somebody that the king trusts with their life because this is the very last person who's going to touch something that may kill them, which means that they trust them. It means that they actually may be dear friends, that there may be some communication happening there, because every time a king has wine, it's at a banquet, it's at important meetings, it's during an important dinner. This individual is in with them. There's some relational connection. Modern day equivalents of this would be the Secret Service for the President of the United States. Guarantee you all the presidents that we've ever had have had close, dear friends a part of the Secret Service. people that they talk to, people they process things with. These people would die for that man or that lady. So what's interesting is that Nehemiah knows that we're all feeling this tension. Can you do anything? Nehemiah, your prayers and your positive thoughts are nice and all, but can you do something? And he's like, guess who I got on speed dial? The king. He's name dropping without even really flaunting it. And then we see what he does when he interacts with the king. I want you to check this out in verse 1 of chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, remember I told you that months are important, dates are important. Underline that again. It's going to come up really, really soon. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, the same year, just a different month, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So he's saying, I've never actually been in an engagement with the king where I was unable to fulfill my vocational responsibilities. I was always able to draw the line. If life was tough, I could keep home, and work. But at this point, I can't. I've never been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? What's going on? This can be nothing but sadness of the heart. There's something deep inside of you that's mourning, Nehemiah. What is it? This means the king cares for Nehemiah. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Why should I be happy when the people I love and the God that I worship and everything about my ancestors has been destroyed? I feel like I've lost everything. Why should I be happy? This is a little good teaching moment for you. It's okay to be honest with your life, friends. Don't put a face on in Christianity. Be broken. Be hurt. Be happy. Be joyful. When life is falling apart, the church should be the place that you should be able to be like, I'm a mess. Yeah. Nehemiah is a mess before a foreign Persian king. And we're coming into church every Sunday. How are you doing? I'm great. And we're like, you don't look great. No, man, I'm fantastic. I'm okay. The king said to me, what is it that you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven. We're not told what he prays. He just throws up one of those Hail Mary prayers, right? We've all felt like this before. You're about to go into your job interview. You get out of the door. You're walking to the building. And you're like, God help me, right? You get out of your car and you're going to that Starbucks because that blind date is there. And you're like, if you're a lady, you're like, please don't make this person a mass murderer, right? If you're a really, really, really super Christian girl and you really want to get married, you're like, please, Jesus, make this my husband, right? Like, it's a joke, by the way. Sorry, ladies. But it's a Hail Mary prayer. We don't know what he prays, but we all do it all the time. We just have one moment, and then he goes all in. And I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I may rebuild it. Then the king and the queen sitting beside him asked me, so this is a big deal. If the queen is present, that means that something huge is happening here. And the queen is intrigued now. She's like, how long is my protector of my husband about to be gone? Big deal, right? So they say, how long will your journey take and when will you be back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time when I would return. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governor of the Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. Basically, he's like, hey, there's a lot of bad people on the way, so I'd love for you to sign something for me to ensure that I ain't going to have no problems. And may I have a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall and for the residence that I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letter. The king also sent army officers and cavalry with me. That's awesome. Ezra mourns, he weeps, he eventually gets this opportunity to stand before the king. He's got sad face on, he's feeling the feels, and the feels are coming out. And everybody knows, right? And they see it. And the king goes, what's going on? And he's like, I got business to do because my God is sending me. And the coolest thing about it is that not only does Nehemiah just ask to go, but he goes all in. He's like, I need safe passage, I need workers, I need timber, I need enough timber and materials and safe passage to not only rebuild the wall and to rebuild the wall around the temple, but I would love a bougie little house. Read it again. He asks for a custom built home and he needs all the timber to make it happen. Nehemiah's going, what do you want? Well, I want everything, because why would I not, right? And why does he ask this? Because he knows that God is for him. He's like, I'm approaching the greatest, most powerful man on earth, but I worship the greatest, most powerful God in the universe, right? That's why he keeps saying the God of heaven, God of all of creation, the God who spoke the cosmos into existence, right? And so he's going all in. And what's so awesome is the king's like, well, cool, okay, yeah, you got it. The same king who signed off on Ezra taking all these Jews to Jerusalem just signed off on Nehemiah to take all this money and material and wealth and to go rebuild. His boldness causes action. And what I love, guys, about what happens here is that there's two pieces that just stick out to me, two things that we can take home personally, and that actually also correlate with where we're at as a church as well, that I love. You can write these down, but there's two little aspects of Nehemiah that, like, when you dive in, you're like, oh, that's cool. The first is this: Nehemiah's patience. In the midst of the destruction and in the midst of the desire to rebuild, in the midst of wanting to see God do something incredible, there was first this astonishing reality of Nehemiah's patience and then also his ultimate pursuit. Let's talk about patience. In the very beginning of chapter 1, in verse 1, there is a month reference. I told you to underline these things. Every time I tell you to underline something, I'm telling you for a reason. Very important things here. In verse 1, it says, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year. So we're given a date reference. In the month of Kislev. Back in the day, in the Persian culture, they did not say August and September and December. They had their own names for months. They also dated things based off of when kings came into power. That was kind of just the way that they referenced things back in the day. We know that this was around 560 BC or so, give or take a year or two. But the very beginning of this entire story, Nehemiah hears about all of this destruction in this month, the month of Kislev. But then in verse 1 of chapter 2, when he finally gets a chance to talk to the king, it's a totally different month. Did you see that? It says in the month of Nisan in the 20th year. You know what's insane? From the month he hears about it, and he weeps and mourns and laments and prays until the month he finally has an opportunity to see if God's gonna come through, 4 months takes place. 4 months of not knowing if God is gonna come through or not. 4 months of wondering if he is going to be faithful. And we want God to work like this, don't we? God, I really wish that you would make me a patient person. Tomorrow we're like on I-25, road raging, punching people in the face. Like, God, I thought you would do that. And he's like, excuse you, right? God, make me generous. God, do this. God, do this. Boom, 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 boom. We think he's a genie in a bottle, right? We think that if we put some money in, he's a vending machine and ding, our dreams pop out. 4 months. And he has no idea if in that 4-month period, the people of Israel get ransacked one more time and all the promises of God are gone. 4 months is a long time. Friends, God is not often early, but he's never late. Patience. It's really hard to be patient with God, isn't it? But patience is one of the biggest things that Jesus teaches us if we decide to follow him. We have to be willing, we have to listen, we have to wait, because patience to God is his way of wondering if we're really in. We talk to a lot of couples here at the church, and they'll talk about, like, why would I save myself before marriage sexually? Why would I not just, be in and test if we're compatible? And we're just like, you're a man and a woman, you're biologically compatible. That's how that works, right? But there's like this waiting period, and the reason behind that, guys, the reason why there's an engagement season, the reason why historically humans, for even non-Jews, they had that waiting moment, is because the couple was proving their faithfulness to each other and saying, are you willing to wait for me? Because look at me. Now, I did not do that to my wife, because she'd have been like, boy, what are you doing? But my wife did that to me. She's like, are you willing to wait? Are you willing to be patient? Are you willing to think I am worth it? God does that to you all the time, friends. And you think that he's against you when he does that to you. Why are you making me wait? Why are you making me wait? Why are you making me wait? And he's like, yeah, because you think I'm someone that I'm not. Because you're asking for something that's going to bring destruction to your life. Wait. 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 Now come. Nehemiah is really patient. He had to wait historically because in Susa, Susa was actually not where the king resided during the summer months. It was a very hot area. He was a cupbearer in Susa. Susa was actually a snowbird location for the Babylonians. Just kind of a fun fact for you. It was basically the Phoenix of the Middle East. And so what would happen is the king would go there during the winter months, which meant that he had to wait 4 months to be able to ask for anything. But he waited. His patience is what we should take from that. And then the second piece is his pursuit. What I love, I won't read it, but at the end of chapter 2, he ends up investigating the walls. So he goes kind of and sneaks around. He's like secret agent Nehemiah, and he's like running around and he's looking at the destruction of the wall because he's figuring out what's wrong with it. And while he's there, he engages with these people, and they say, "What are you doing here? What's going on? Why are you doing this?" And someone even says to him, you're going against what the king wants. You're going to be destroyed. And then Nehemiah says, oh, no. The hand of my God is upon me, and he is the God of heaven, and these are his people. And I love how not only is Nehemiah patient, but his ultimate pursuit is not just the restoration of the wall, but it's God. He wants God. He wants a move of God. He wants God to prove himself faithful. He wants an Elijah moment where he calls down fire and says, do this, man. Like, he's going, I want God. And if God restores, awesome. But his ultimate pursuit is God. Patience and his ultimate pursuit. You know what's amazing, friends, is I've got this key, and I call this key the patience key. And the reason behind why I call it the patience key, and it's a term I've kind of called the key of patience, make a movie about it, is because this key took 4 months to make. And it's not because like some poor soul was like grinding away at it, like for 4 months, like, no, make me a key. That was not what was going on. The reason why this key took 4 months to make is because 4 months ago, Lighthouse got an eviction notice for this building. We talked about it in January, and we just confessed to you all that the landlords of the building didn't want us here, and we were out in August, and we were told that in January, and our elders and our staff, we were like, what are you doing, God? And so we wept and we prayed and we fasted, and we got a couple of elders here today, and we did that. And we said, God, what are you doing? And then we found this building, but we weren't sure if it was gonna be possible. And we waited, no joke, 4 months. And I was like literally writing my sermon this week. And I was like, God, in your providence, if I would have just kept reading in Nehemiah, I would have just known what you were going to do. Come on now. It's not often early, but he's never late, right? So last Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. on the dot, when wire transfers were allowed to be finalized in the United States, Lighthouse Church got our building. And on Friday at 7 p.m., I got the keys to the building. And this is the key. This is the key of promise, the key of patience, the key of faithfulness. And this key opens up this building right behind me. You guys see that? It's not that pretty yet. This is a 3D rendering of what it will look like, hopes and dreams, right? Right now it's green, and it's full of soccer fields, which, is only fun to worship on for like 2 weeks. And then you got to do some stuff to it, right? But this is the thing that we had patiently waited for. And we didn't know if God would be faithful, to be honest with you. I was literally making plan B plans of like, well, I guess we're going back to a high school. And we made jokes about it, but none of us wanted to do that at all. And if you were here at Lighthouse when we were in a high school, you're like, oh God, please no, not those days. But this key, that's ours now. And it's amazing because we had to wait and we had to be patient and we had to listen to God. That building is actually, next slide, it's located 5.5, 6 minutes south of here. So Sheridan is over there, Wads is here. Wads is this main street. And if you took a right on Wads and you followed it all the way down to Jewel and you took a left, there used to be White Fence Farms. That poor place, man, they had the best fried chicken. And it went out of business, unfortunately. So, but that's where the new building is. It's about a 6.5 minute drive from here. If you're down south, you're probably like, praise Jesus, and then if you're northwest of here, you're like, come on, right? But hey, it's 5 minutes, right? This is the family. You drive plenty to go like to your favorite restaurant, right? You can drive for the Lord, right? But we've got this building, and yes, that was a jab. So no excuses of people leaving Lighthouse because the drive is long, okay? We have highways. So, but this is the new building. And here's the timeline that we've got for how things are gonna roll for our church. Next slide. It's a lot of information. I'll give you stuff after the service, okay? We bought the building May 1st. Today or tomorrow, we are beginning a 30-day prayer guide of generosity. We have to raise $300,000 to be able to renovate the building. We own the building, but it's got soccer fields in it. So, it needs to look pretty, right? So we're gonna start a generosity teaching series out of the book of Nehemiah. And then in a month from now, we're gonna have commitment Sundays where you guys will be able to commit your time, your talents, your treasures, who you are as a person, commit to this family. And then we'll begin renovations. We will celebrate a month from there, one more service in this building. And by August, we will be in the new building because that's literally when we have to be out. And that's insane. Can we just say that? And then we got this big grand opening, and that's gonna be awesome. But here's the deal, guys. This is what I love about the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah's patience with God caused him to have his only pursuit be a move of God. And here's the deal. We have a building, we have a location, we have a great worship team, we have a great greeting team, we have great elders, we have great leaders, but guess what all of that is? Man-made. And do you know what ends every 40 or 50 years or so? Man-made things. What we need is a move of God. What Lighthouse needs when we move into that building is to plead with God for more salvations, more baptisms, more people coming to know Jesus, to be a much more ethnically diverse church than we are right now, because we're going into a neighborhood that's 36% Hispanic. And so we want to reach into that neighborhood and not be the white saviors, right? And if you're Hispanic and this or Latino or anything in this room, we love you, and we want to be so diverse in our church, and not only in our staff, but our elders and in our church as a whole. And the reality is the only way that can happen is if God does something amazing. And so my challenge to us this morning is very simple. We're gonna worship and we're gonna respond because we love God. we are going to sing all of like how we normally do, 3 songs celebrating the goodness and favor of Jesus Christ. But during our time of response, not only do I want you to come to the tables that are all throughout the room and take communion. If you're a believer in Jesus, you can come, take the bread, dip it in the juice. And not only do I want you to come and give faithfully to the church, your tithes and offerings and your generosity. We'll talk about giving to the campaign later. Don't worry about that right now. But in the midst of your response and singing and worship, what I want us to do is I want, if you're physically able, to kneel before God, whether you're in your seats or at the front of the stage, and to plead with God that he would give us patience and that our ultimate pursuit would be him. Guys, in 3 months, we're gonna be somewhere that we've never been. We're gonna be ministering to people we've never met before. We're gonna be in a new area that may or may not hate us for all we know. And the only way that this is going to happen is if God does something, if God moves. And that's how we're gonna respond as we worship today. So I'm gonna pray. We'll spend a little bit of time in silence as I pray. And then we'll come to the front, we'll take communion, we'll give, and we will celebrate. And we got one song at the very end that's awesome. I can't wait to sing it with you. But let's pray together.